Okay. All right. So we're back at Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Mary Harrington, contributing editor at Unheard, author of Feminism Against Progress. Mary, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So we've had some exchanges on Substack. I did a guest publish on your page, and we've been talking a little bit back and forth. And I saw that you recently posted something about Baudrillard's America. So as a big fan of his, I just had to ask you some of your hot takes, some of your thoughts on the book. So that's going to be the focus. So tell us, first off, how did you come across this book? Like what drew your attention to it?
Um, I wrote a really bad first draft of the introduction to the book I'm currently working on, and I sent it to a great friend who's a connoisseur of American simulation, a writer on technology and a bunch of other things besides. A great guy. I don't know. Maybe I should name it. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I won't. Anyway, he's a connoisseur of American simulation. And he said, because I told a story in the book about my first ever encounter with the United States, the first time I visited, when I rode the Greyhound bus coast to coast
Mm,
through some of the solo. Way before I had no idea. I had no idea that it was possibly a personally risky thing to do. But people were really nice to me. I realized, sort of,
really?
with hindsight, that maybe the reason I didn't end up dead was British accent privilege. But I didn't
Hmm.
really think about any of that at the time.
Could
It
be.
was a very interesting, very fun, very illuminating road trip. I started in Massachusetts and I ended up at Burning Man. Um,
Oh
so it
wow.
was so I
Oh,
really sort of
that's
ran
like
the gamut,
another level.
all the way from the Puritans, or at least the traces of the Puritans to whatever the hell that was. Uh,
Wow.
and this was like 2002, I think. So,
Wow.
before Burning Man was, I mean, it was on the verge of becoming cringe, I think, at that point, but it wasn't quite there yet. I gather there's a range of views now on whether or not it's still worth going. But I mean, it didn't rain that year. I had a great time. It was and I told that story in the book as a preamble to why I'm writing about what I'm writing about. Um and my friend, this connoisseur of American simulation, said, "Oh, you should read Baudrillard's book on America. You should read." And I picked it up and I opened them about 6 pages in. You know how when you read things, you screenshot them and you spam your friends.
Yes.
Um,
I've been there.
you know that thing. So I kept sending him. I kept spamming him with these passages, and just and my immediate reaction was, it's probably a good thing that I didn't have that book to hand. I had something really dull and or sort of worthy and academic with me. It was like a source book this thick that I
Mhm.
bought from a bookshop in Harvard, all of it was a source book for American history, which I knew nothing about at the time. I was like, oh, I'll educate myself as I go, and I had no idea what any of it was about. But anyway, that was I think I lost it on the plane on the way.
Oh,
Anyway, it didn't make it back with me. This sort of brick of worthy history materials. Um, but yeah, I think we're what, about 20 years on from that, and my friend told me I should read Baudrillard, and it's probably for the best because it was a pretty mind warping experience, that trip,
yes.
as it was. And I think if I'd and I'd sort of encountered Baudrillard at university in the
Yeah.
late 90s, early aughts. So I knew a bit what he was about. But I think that might have just been a bit too much, like a bit too meta to have that guy in my back pocket while I was riding the Greyhound bus across America.
Yeah.
In the fairly recent aftermath of the Twin Towers, I'm not sure that could have coped. Um, so that's why I was reading Baudrillard. But
Mhm.
actually, it was a great reference to bounce off my recollections and my sort of reflections on the American phenomenon since. I mean, I've been back and forth for various different reasons since that first visit, and I visit the United States fairly regularly in the course of my writing work. I love America. I mean, it's
Mhm.
very different, where it's not just the divided by a common language thing. The relationship between us over here and you guys over there is very complicated. But it's complicated in an endlessly interesting way.
Yeah.
And I'm always surprised by how different you all are. But okay, anyway, you want that was not a hot take. That was like the preamble to
Yeah.
the hot take, which means it's now like a tepid take.
But
So I'm
before
sorry
we get
about
into the
that.
book, I do want to ask you because you're
Yeah,
saying you
go on.
first encountered Baudrillard in college. What was and you're saying that was the 90s. So like what was the I don't know, like how did people perceive Baudrillard at that point? Like, I mean, what's the,
I mean, it wasn't taught.
yeah,
I mean, his
yeah,
work his work wasn't taught on my course, on which was English literature.
yeah,
At Oxford in the late 90s, early aughts, that was, I think, I mean, to the best of my knowledge, it still is. But then it was a fairly classical frog march through the English literary canon in more or less chronological order from Beowulf to about 1945.
mm,
And there were various kind of sidebar bits that they bolted on. You could do optionals, and I opted to do critical theory as one of them.
okay,
Um, and I think, and then we got, structuralism and post-structuralism and the various sort of grievance isms. And then if you wanted to get really wiggy, you could sort of go down a Baudrillard rabbit hole, but you were basically on your own with that.
okay,
I found all of that stuff really interesting in a this is making me psychotic kind of a way.
yeah,
So I spent some extra time.
that's fun.
I didn't no extra credit, but some extra time reading bits and bobs of Baudrillard. But I don't think, in as much as Baudrillard was received at all, it wasn't then transmitted to undergraduates, his
Mm.
work. I mean,
Yeah, because I'm like
I don't even, is it now? Is his work taught now?
only at like weird places. I mean,
Why?
I don't know, because like I mean, when I was in undergrad, we just got the standard post-structuralist curriculum.
Mm,
Like it was
yeah,
Foucault, Butler, Derrida. No one ever t mentioned the post-Marxist, the situationist. Like that was never on our radar at all.
no.
And yeah, I mean, I guess if you do like media studies, media theory, like you're gonna come across him. But yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting though is that, like, as you're saying, like the post-structuralists, because they're very dogmatic, because they can be co-opted for these, very political, politicized ideologies. The like Baudrillard, Deleuze, Guattari, like these people can't be, it's hard to use them to those ends. So I think that's why, like, because it's not politically expedient, they don't really touch on them.
Mm.
I don't know, like the more I have like delved
Too
in.
weird.
Yeah, it's
Too
too
weird,
weird and
too
it's
elusive.
yeah, but it's too weird. It's not useful enough. But I also think there is a lot more truth in what they're because it's so insane. Like they're capturing
Mm.
something much more real
Yeah, 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 yeah,
than, Foucault, Butler, etc. And the people
yeah.
who read them, like the more I've kind of delved into this world, like you see that there's like a lot of crazy people, but these are a lot of people are onto something, you know.
Mm.
That's kind of why I think the academy kind of like pushes people to the side. Um,
Could be, yeah.
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
one of the Baudrillard texts that I refer to most often is probably The Transparency of Evil, which reads as a
Mhm.
little bit dated in some places, or at least it feels as though things have got weirder since he wrote it in ways that I'm sure he'd have a lot to say around if he was if he was still with us. A lot,
Oh,
so we're several notches further round on the ratchet in some ways. But every so often he just comes out with these sort of little aphorisms which just feel completely true.
yes.
Like the one that springs to mind is he remarks almost in passing that the moment something is designated a right, that means it's entered the realm of scarcity,
Yeah.
which just
Totally
catches
fine.
something profoundly true about the way things work, as things are now.
Yeah, I mean, and this
And I
is
mean, what's grievance studies meant to do with that?
that's the thing.
That's
Like
the
you
problem, isn't
can't.
it?
No, and I wrote something for First Things I think last year, kind of making this argument that you can easily make a horseshoe from Baudrillard to like a kind of traditional Christian metaphysic theology. And that's what,
I
like
can see that.
especially with like transparency of evil,
Mm,
like as a person of faith, I read that and I'm like, yeah, everything you're saying is correct. Like you're coming at it
yeah,
from
yeah.
kind of an inverted lens,
Yep. Yep.
but
Yep.
in
Yep.
essence, everything you're saying is completely
Yeah,
true.
I mean,
You
the
know?
this is I've spent a long time trying to get my head around why it was that reading Derrida and everything after Derrida sent me low-key psychotic for a few years, and like it's taken me no, I'm not exaggerating. I
Yeah.
went completely bonkers for a few years. I don't think I'm alone. I think that's
Mm.
not unusual. Um, and after the best part of 20 years of reading and trying to figure out what happened there later, I've come to the conclusion that they like all of like that entire body of work is people in the 20th century rediscovering formal and final cause and just being really angry about it.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Um,
okay. Wow. Yeah.
and
That makes a lot
like
of
the
sense.
saltiness is the bit which makes it which makes you go a little bit crazy. But the
Mhm.
moment you're like, oh, okay, no, that's just real, then it stops being crazy making and just becomes something you need to metabolize and work with, which is how you do the horseshoe all the way back around
Yeah.
to pre-Protestant Christianity.
Yeah.
You just come
Yeah.
at it the back way.
No, that yeah,
Sort
that
of
makes
reverse
sense.
into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so
You know.
America. So tell us, you're saying so when you first read it, how that kind of shed light on your own experiences in the US.
Um,
So tell us a little more there.
Actually, I'll tell you the first thing that sprang to mind when I was reading it, which is that a lot of what he says still feels true.
Mhm.
And his observation about the modernness of America as distinct from the Europeanness of Europe,
Mhm.
and how this is actually which sets the two worlds apart,
Yeah.
feels true and very and absolutely spot on. It's probably more difficult to discern if you're British in relation to America or if you're American in relation to Britain,
Mhm.
because we're confused by this partial commonality of language.
Yeah.
Um, but but I think it's profoundly true, in the sense that, uh, well, from the point of view of the argument that I'm sort of halfway down the rabbit hole making at the moment, America is the land that print built, and Europe isn't. That's profoundly historically true of America, and in a way which is just, print is a kind of overlay or a filter on the European world. And everything which follows from print in terms of, from a sort of media theory point of view, Europe was there before the printing press.
Mhm.
America kind of wasn't. I mean, but
Yeah.
not in the contemporary USA sense of America. There were people
Right.
there, but America was not there before the printing press.
Yeah.
Um, and that's probably how I would gloss what Baudrillard is saying there. But again, I think he's absolutely on point in a way which was as true now as it was in the Reagan era, possibly more so. But one way I think his observations are out of date, or the one particular thing that jumped out at me that feels out of date, is where he says Americans have no sense of simulation, and I just don't think that's true anymore. And I
Mm.
think what's changed there is the digital revolution, because I'll tell you an anecdote.
Yes.
I mean, I'll offer some anecdata to back this up. So, in the middle of COVID, which was about the most hallucinatory, simulatory experience that
Mhm.
surely anybody has ever lived through ever. The whole thing was just simulation all the way down. Um, I needed to get I needed to get to the United States, which was at the time administratively almost impossible,
Yeah.
because there were travel bans in place and various things. And the only way to get to the United States was to apply for an I visa, which is the journalist visa.
Ah, wow.
And provide supplementary, prove that I'm a journalist and that I need to travel to the United States for work. Um, so I jumped through all the bureaucratic hoops and I did all the necessary things for that. Which is like hostile bureaucracy is really a specialism of your country. They're
Yes.
extraordinarily thorough about
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
So I got through all of those hurdles, and the final hurdle that you had to get through was an interview in person at the U.S. Embassy in London.
Okay.
Now this building's like the Death Star. I mean, it's sort of hallucinatory in itself. It's sort of huge and vast expanses of blank concrete and security theatre and genuine security, and all the sort of architecture of state power. And yeah, that it's kind of built to be quite intimidating in a very modernist way. So I turn up there and I sort of make my way through the Death Star, and everybody's got their masks on, and all the security theatre and the COVID theatre and the sort of layers and layers and layers of this bizarreness. I'm sat there in the waiting area. Uh, sorry, a detail for this. The conference that I was going to the United States for was NatCom, which was it
Ah,
just kind of
okay.
it kind of adds a layer of kind of comedy to the
Sure.
whole thing, from the point of view of encountering the then really not very NatCon kind of American administrative
Mhm.
apparatus. I was like, how are they going to care? Like, I don't know. I have no idea how people are going to respond to this. But so I was in a state of total uncertainty at this point, with my mask on, sitting there in the waiting room, and I'm reading James Poulos's book Human Forever, which is all about the digital catastrophe and the
Yeah.
kind of the advent of total simulation, and that all of that. I'm sat there in the waiting room reading this, and then And then I get to it's my turn. My number comes up, and it's my turn to go for the interview. And I'm like, what's going to happen? Are they going to like jump out from behind and take me? Well, I don't know what's going to happen. And all that happened was this very sweet, affable little American bureaucrat behind sort of 4 inches of plexiglass, stamps my thing and then says to me in a completely conversational way, "So do you think we're living in a simulation then?"
What? Oh my God.
And I was like,
It's
I
horrifying.
want to go home now. I want to go home.
Wow.
And I sort of smiled and thanked him and backed out of the room and backed out of the Death Star and got on a train and went home and was just like, what just happened?
Okay.
So that's my
Didn't see
evidence
that coming.
to, to,
Yeah.
to push back against Baudrillard's assertion in the Reagan era that Americans have no sense of simulation. I submit, based on that experience, that actually that has changed
A little bit.
a little bit.
Some people really. I think some people will say it or like have a surface level understanding, but I don't think they have. They don't understand the full extent to which that's the case. Because like
I
there's,
mean, I've no idea what was going on with that little bureaucrat in his box. I
yeah,
mean, maybe he didn't even
maybe
exist.
he
Maybe it
knew
was just a
something.
simulation.
Maybe
Maybe
he
he
knew
knew
something the
something.
others don't know. No, but I mean,
Yeah.
I say that because like I
Maybe
look
he
at
wasn't even real. I don't know.
maybe he was the simulation. I don't, maybe he was Neo in the Matrix. I don't know. But
I
no,
don't
but I
know.
like I see how many people, at least here, really buy into a lot of like the boilerplate narratives that are, spewed out by the media and like have no sense that the majority of it is manufactured, it's simulated. And like when you kind of prod them, they're just like, yeah, but no, but this is what it is. And I'm like, yeah, but it's clearly not. And they're like, no, like I don't know. Maybe it's the people I hang around, but I think like we may say like, oh yeah, of course everything's kind of manufactured, but like I just think we really want to believe everything's still real. Because if you confront this fact, it's going to force you to really reevaluate everything. And we don't want to do that because we love comfort here. We really love that. That's my observation. I don't know. I don't know. But anyway,
Well, maybe maybe I need to meet a few more. But I mean, I'm speaking to you. You're an American. You have a sense of simulation. The little bureaucrat behind his plexiglass, he had a sense of simulation. My friend, my American friend, the connoisseur of American simulation, who told me to read Baudrillard, also has a good sense of simulation. That's three. There's the more than
right.
two is a trend. I stand by my view. Baudrillard is. Things have changed a little bit since he wrote that book.
Yeah.
Maybe not completely. And I mean,
No.
normally is going to norm, right? But
Yeah.
um,
Mm.
I
But
think I think things have changed a little bit.
I mean, but I'm interested in like I see his attitude towards Europe to be, I mean, very pessimistic. And I don't know, like I have the kind of opposite reaction when I am in Europe. I mean, I remember the first time I visited family in Greece, going to Italy, ended up studying. I mean, this is the Mediterranean, so it's a whole other world. But I don't know, like I was fascinated by how, first of all, how real everything felt because like things have roots. Like there's a very strong sense of tradition, even if, these countries are becoming very progressive. Like they're inherently traditional cultures, which, and these roots ground the cultures in reality. And it was, I don't know, like it was viscerally very different from my experience growing up in American suburbs. To Baudrillard, like this is a negative thing, like the rootlessness, the extent to which America is a truly modern country, like this to him is exciting, it's alluring. And I'm like, no, like this is what's horrible about it. So I don't know. I mean, what do you make of this juxtaposition he makes between
It's funny.
Europe?
I don't know. I don't know that I read him as finding that maybe it's just you that you're reading it in a different tone of voice to me.
Hmm.
But to me, I didn't get excitement from that. But again, maybe that's just me.
I mean,
I
because
didn't
in
I didn't
the
get sort of I didn't get
yeah.
the sort of, oh wow, this is thrilling and forward looking and therefore it's going to sort of take us
Hmm.
on. I got a sense of at least as much of sort of strangeness and superficiality and alienation from it
But the
as any
hot when he
sense
talks
of
about the
excitement or possibility.
freeway, like he says like there's something thrilling about the nothingness of the freeway, that it's like all fake and it's at least I perceive it to be saying like there's infinite possibilities in the like emptiness, the nothingness that you find in the US, the
Mm,
rootlessness. I don't know if it's like an
yeah.
ironic kind of excitement, if or but at least that's what I perceived. I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe he wouldn't take that view if he had to commute every day. Perhaps not.
Well, that's
Um,
another thing. The grass is always greener, I guess. But
Also, the last American freeway I encountered was in LA. And again, this is something I wonder what Baudrillard would have made of the fact that you now have pay to enter express lanes on the freeways because the
mm,
traffic sucks so badly everywhere else. I mean, he's not with us, but maybe you can channel Baudrillard and speculate on what he would have made of that, because I'm not sure it would have had the sense of sort of universal empty forward going infinite possibility, to see to encounter something like that, which is so sort of physically stratified according to wealth.
yeah, I mean that makes me think of in Compact, Peter Hitchens wrote a very long apologia against cars and how
Yeah.
horrible they are, which I mean I found so it's just to be a breath of fresh air because when you're sitting on a highway in traffic and you're just stopped there, like I think this is when it hits you, the simulation that it's so like empty and nihilistic that I'm like supposedly have this modern technology, the convenience of the car and the highway, and then I'm sitting here stuck. Why why did we invent this? Like why don't we just keep the walkable city where, it's human and you can breathe? So I don't know, I think it's like again, the excitement that I perceive when I'm reading him that like, oh, the freeway, it's open, it's completely, infinite possibility. The
He's talking
inevitable
about desert freeways there, I guess.
yeah,
This
I
idea
mean,
that there's
different
a sort
from
of
New
infinite
York
space. Yeah.
freeways, but still in principle, like this concept of the open road, it's and again, symbolic of the like modernity, the rootlessness of America. Like you on the surface, it's infinite possibilities, but like the ultimate trajectory is inertia, like you're stuck because it goes nowhere. And I think you feel that when you're stuck in traffic. But
Mm,
do you
mm,
guys have horrible traffic over there? Does that happen?
mm, mm,
Okay, so
very
it's
much so.
universal now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's kind of
Mm,
that's a function of the car, isn't it?
yeah.
It doesn't matter how much you widen your roads. If you widen your roads, it's like work expanding to fit the time available. The
Yeah.
cars will just expand to fit the available number of lanes. The latest genius thing that they've come up with, is something called smart motorways, which is just a pure, totally dystopian nightmare. Again, Baudrillard would have a lot to say about it. It's incredibly dystopian. What they are, well, all that means is that they've added an extra lane by getting rid of the hard shoulder, which is like the safety lane, which you can pull off into.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
if something goes wrong with your car, you can pull over to the side and you've got somewhere to be where you're not going to obstruct the traffic or get squashed by a passing wagon or whatever. So they got rid of that, or rather, they've just turned it into a new lane. And apparently, or so they claim, they can manage the traffic should anyone get into trouble through a whole network of sensors overhead, which will vary the speed limit depending
Yeah.
on what's going on, or close lanes or open lanes. And of course, these don't work properly necessarily, or they break down, or they don't update in time, or and but they're linked to all of these speed cameras, which will now automatically issue you a ticket if for whatever reason you're not paying
Mm.
attention when you go. Yeah. um so it just introduces a whole new level of oppression and tension and enemy and also danger to the experience of being on the motorway. And it's just it's the absolute note perfect mixture of incompetence, sketchy technological reliability, and sort of intrusive authoritarianism, which I sort of feel like is very characteristic of the British application of that sort of infinite possibilities version of modernity.
Yeah.
So, I mean, from that point of view, I'm 100% with you on just wanting to burn it all to the ground. I think we'd on balance, it would suck for a bit while we got used to it, but we'd probably be better off in the long run if we did. But I just don't think it
Yeah.
works like that.
You know what I mean? Do you know what strodes are? Have you ever? Okay, there's like a whole like YouTube rabbit hole. Strodes are, at least in the US, it's like these highways where there are strip malls on the side. They're not like complete highways, like they have traffic lights. but they're like high speed roads with surrounded by stores. And it's like the idea is that okay, like the whole problem is that these are replacing downtowns. So you have
Hmm.
like the residential where it's completely residential for miles, and then you concentrate all the businesses on these like
Ah, got
high
it.
speed.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like first of all, it's extremely dangerous because like the cars are going so fast. The sidewalks are very small, but also in terms of just like the design with the businesses, like they're not conducive to like having actual human interactions. They're all chain stores. They have giant parking lots. Like, so it's, I don't know, it's like kind of the antithesis of the walkable city. And there's a meme that went viral a few years ago where it's like, you know, older generations are like, why don't kids go outside anymore? And then they show the picture of the road and it's like the outside that they built for the kids. And for me, like this is, I don't know, again, like growing up in suburban New Jersey, like I don't know, being surrounded by residential areas where you have to drive really far, park in this like giant parking lot and go to the chain store. It's like it's in it for me, like this is the epitome of the American simulation. Like it's completely
Mm.
a disembodied experience. And I don't know, like my whole thing is that all of our identity personality disorders stem from, I mean, there's a reason why suburban American kids are all becoming non-binary or on Prozac or whatever. I think this has a lot to do with it.
Say more.
Whereas
This is interesting.
yeah, and like because but then like when I meet kids from urban areas who like actually have to walk around and interact with people, like they're not worrying about their identity or their mood disorder. I mean, it happens, but I just think the like the simulational kind of setup of these parts of America are conducive to this dissociation from reality. And I think he's
I
kind
mean, I
of
guess if you kind of can't go outside, maybe, or you can only go outside through the mediating power of your parents who have the car keys. You know, maybe that lends itself
but
to a view of it, an understanding of power where, you know, an adult or an authority figure has to confer your identity as well
yeah,
through
because
a
you have
kind
no
of bureaucratic
agency.
process. Because you have
Yeah.
no, yeah, no, that kind of that maybe tracks. Also, you probably spend a lot of time online. That also tracks.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that could work.
Yeah, so, but okay, so then the other thing I want to ask you, so he kind of juxtaposes West Coast, LA, Vegas with New York City. Um, and I don't know, I mean, as a New York supremacist, I don't know, I mean, he focuses on the verticality of New York, that like you have all these skyscrapers that unlike, you know, the architecture in Europe, which has this sacramental quality, like the architecture points to some
Uh,
ultimate ideal.
I can tell you haven't visited anywhere in Britain outside the pretty bits.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to London and Oxford, and that's it. So London didn't impress
Okay,
me.
okay,
Oxford, yeah, Oxford did, but
okay. But I just say I can send you some images if you want to
okay,
complicate the idea of our sacramental architecture.
all right.
And I'm very happy to do that later on.
Well, in the Mediterranean, I think it's another story, but North versus, I don't know. There are ugly parts of
Again, I mean,
Italy as well. I don't know.
les banlieues on the outskirts of any city in France. You know,
True. That's fair.
yeah,
But
everything by Le Corbusier. There's, I mean,
mm,
if it's a sacrament, I'm not sure what what it's
a
sacrificing to.
satanic sacrament, maybe. But
Yeah, maybe, but it's
yeah, yeah, but I
so.
don't know. So, but anyway, he's saying it's like it's this kind of verticality without pointing to something sacred, whereas in the West Coast, it's completely horizontal, completely flat. Um, and like I hate LA, I hate the West Coast in part because like I believe New York as much as yes, like it's this like this verticality devoid of like the sacramental order. I do believe New York is a traditional city because first of all, like the city has maintained its roots. Like you have all these immigrant subcultures that maintain a presence here. Also, like you do have some beautiful architecture, beautiful buildings. You have like real neighborhoods where people still like interact and like are humans. But also that it's like New Yorkers are very alive. Like everybody's looking for something here. Everyone's full of desire. Sure, they may chase after like empty things, but like you could see that something's happening in these people's souls. Whereas in the West Coast, like I do perceive this complete flatness. And it's partially because like it is a rootless kind of like it's the entire like urban design is predicated on not maintaining any roots, not maintaining any legacy. Like it's always changing, everything's always moving. Um, so I don't know. I mean, that's my prejudice, but I don't know. I'm curious, like, if you saw any things in like when he's talking about the East versus West Coast, New York, LA.
Um, oh yeah, I mean, on balance, I've spent more time on the East Coast than the West
Okay.
Coast. I mean, I think everything that you say rings broadly true to me. Or I mean, I don't really understand
Mm.
Californian Americans. It's not a disposition. It's not a disposition that I vibe with very comfortably because I think there's a kind of extreme libertarianism which feels like when you encounter it, it's intended as this courteous respect for your absolute autonomy,
Mm.
but in some contexts it comes across as low-key sociopathic.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think it's meant that way. It's meant as a kind of as an honoring of your total freedom to be whoever you are, and to actualize yourself in whatever means you see fit. But if you're choosing to actualize yourself by dying of a meth overdose on the sidewalk and people are just going around you, I don't know. Like there are some
Yeah.
situations where I'm not sure that works. However, I mean the last two times I went to the West Coast. One was to an extremely Tony bit of the coast north of LA,
Mm.
which was kind of interesting because I saw like the surgery cat face in person. I'd never seen Instagram face in real
Yeah.
life before.
Yeah.
And like I saw a whole load like, and what's so weird about it is that they're all converging on the same face, and there's
Yeah.
something really eerie about that. Like that this is people's actual flesh, and somehow it's converging on this kind of, I don't know. It's like a sort of, it's like something is trying to incarnate itself through them in a in
Mm.
through this sort of technological sculpture of the flesh. Yeah, it's very eerie. So that was kind of, that was striking. But the other experience I've had of the West Coast recently was a Catholic seminary in Menlo Park,
Mm.
which is which just doesn't feel like it wasn't that at all. It's a
Yeah.
very extremely different environment. There you are, you've got a statue of the Virgin Mary on this fabulous lawn, neoclassical building, and then palm trees and a coyote sunning itself on the grass. I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
I think you just have to, it just reads, it reads in a very different register to New York, where everything's stacked up very densely, and you have to look up. Or at least I find, the whole invitation is to look up at the sheer density of the place. It's one of my favorite places to go running, New York City.
Hmm.
Um,
Why?
it's just really visually impressive. I mean, it's not that complicated,
Yeah.
and Central Park is lovely. Um,
It is.
although
Yeah.
I also, yeah, I understand why tiny dogs. Um, I never really understood why tiny dogs until I went around
Yeah.
Central Park and I saw people exercising their not tiny dogs at like 5 in the morning because that's the only time it's not incredibly antisocial to do that. And I kind of felt sorry for the dogs, and I thought,
Okay.
no, actually, it's the ethical thing to do if you love dogs and you live in New York City is to get a really small dog. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, but yeah,
Hmm.
it's Manhattan's a fabulous place to go for a run. I'm a connoisseur of early morning runs, like the jet
Hmm.
lag run at
Ah.
sunrise
Okay.
in
Wow.
American cities. And I think New York City is probably my favorite for that.
Mm.
Because and also, you get the sun coming up through these glass canyons, and it's just visually quite
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
And it's also, unless you get very lost, if you're in Manhattan, chances are you're fairly safe. Chances are there's people around. Chances are, as a solo female traveler, you'll be all right. There are
For the most
there are there are
part.
much more dangerous places to go for a run at 5 a.m. than Manhattan.
Yes. Yeah.
So on
That's
on
true.
balance, I think I can probably
Yeah.
outrun anybody who might be a danger to me
Yeah.
at that time of the morning.
Yeah. How is the culture different in London versus New York? And what do you see?
I don't know. I don't live in London. I wouldn't know if you paid me, to be honest.
Why?
It's very expensive. It's
Yeah.
become it's become very hostile, and it's also, if you'll forgive me, just like when I lived in London, it was still the capital of England. Now it's an international city in a network of international cities,
Mm,
which is it's inhabited by international people.
mm,
Which is just a very, that's a very multi-ethnic demographic group of people. Some of them are English, and some of them are not. It's a completely different thing,
yeah.
but it's a global city which happens to be in my country, and that's
Mm,
just, I'm a mum. I have kids. I like to go running. I have a dog. I want to keep chickens. That's just not the lifestyle which
yeah.
I enjoy or particularly want. And it's also just not a lifestyle which is very enjoyable unless you're several notches richer than I am. So, yeah, I'm just not up for that.
Yeah, understandable. Yeah. So no, I mean, but so I want to go back to what you were saying about this kind of like libertarian niceness, the respect for people's freedom. Because it made me think of this part where he talks about Reagan's smile, that his
Oh,
smile is
yes.
emblematic
Yeah, yeah,
of,
yeah.
again, like the fake nice, that everything is good, everything's great, but behind it, you know that it's like, you know,
Oh, on that subject, if we come back to Reagan's smile, what do you make of Reagan, the actor, as president, as the sort of proto-Trump in that
I mean,
sense of
yeah,
being
when I was
the
reading,
first,
yeah,
was he the first simulation, the president of the
yes.
simulation?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, completely. That's like this is literally what I wrote in the margins in this
Mm.
section that like he is no, like that's and not just persona wise, but also I think policy wise. Like this is when we start going into this hyper real type of politics. I mean, I don't want to get into politics too
That was
much,
when
but
financialization began, wasn't it? And that was
yeah.
when deindustrialization began,
Yeah, I mean, it's a
was
politics
the Reagan
divorced from
era.
the real.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think he was the perfect one to kind of initiate this because, and he's an actor, he's a performer. The other thing that, like he was kind of the champion of like the right, the culture war, like the new
Mm,
right in the US, which was always ironic to me because he was divorced more than once, I don't know. But also he legalized no fault divorce in California, which was one of the first
mm,
states to do so, which set it off. I don't know, I harp a lot about divorce, not that I judge
mm.
anyone who is, but like the concept of no fault to me is always like this is to me one of the most simulational because I'm just like as a child of this, as a product of this, I'm just like, how do we dance around the fact that like a child's life is implicated? Like obviously in the case of abuse and blah blah blah, fine, but and then the fact that this guy who kind of spurred the whole like religious right, the right-wing culture war, I'm like, but this is not a conservative, like a truly traditional person would at
Mm.
least take some issue with the concept of a no-fault divorce. Anyway, I don't know. This is
It was the British Conservative Party in the last government that legalized no-fault divorce in Britain as well. And hitherto it hadn't been a thing here either. So it's sort of interesting to wonder why it is that conservatives or people self-identified conservatives, shall we say, of that era should have been able to square that circle with themselves. I I honestly I have to say I struggle to understand it. Um, it's sort of it feels like I'm not understanding what their vision is
but
of
this
the
is
good, or their
this
understanding of the human person is such as for that to make sense.
But that's why I think like because Reagan was kind of the one who spurred the culture war, at least in the US. Like to me, the culture war is the epitome of like the simulational politic, which has nothing to do with reality. Because
Hmm.
again, at least if you look at, I know this is, I mean, we're going veering into dangerous territory, but the fact that like the US, in the US, the right was really gung-ho about opposing gay marriage, which I have reservations about, but when you compare that to No Fault, I'm just like, these are two completely different things because again, especially when there's a child involved, like this is an actual danger, like in reality, and it's you can measure the result. With gay marriage, again, sure, it's a slippery slope, but like I can't wrap my head around the fact that like this very real threat that No Fault poses. Like we're just like, oh well, whatever. But with gay marriage. It's like, okay, on a symbolic level, we must fight this, but I don't know. This is a thing that I like play around with in my head. But back to Reagan, like, yeah, I think he's the one who kind of spurred this
You
type
might
of
have to help me. You might have to help me a little bit with your my American political history and chronology. But I read a really interesting book. I think last year or the year before, super interesting actually, about the history of NOW, the National Organization for Women,
hmm
which arose in the aftermath of the Civil Rights Act and the sort of legislation that fell out of that. You know, this whole sort of emerging state architecture of kind of imposing equal outcomes across the board. You know, I mean, there's lots of discourse about that now, but back then it was a very, very genuinely meant and well-intentioned set of campaigns to try and to just genuinely just try and make the world a better place. And one of the interesting sort of sideways reads that I had of this history of NOW is that in a sense the campaign that they it was very heterogeneous to begin with. It was very grassroots. It was very diverse,
Yeah.
genuinely diverse, and like not DEI diverse, but also ethnically diverse, but also genuinely politically diverse, based on in different chapters had their own agendas and what they wanted to pursue and so on. And over time, it gradually consolidated into like the proto form of the NGO industrial complex.
Mhm.
It was the fundraising was nationalized, the management was centralized, policy making was centralized, and the only thing, and the one policy and the one sort of campaign thing they managed to coalesce around was the Equal Rights Act. This sort of this demand to add to is it to the Constitution this sort of compulsory recognition of everybody as interchangeable, or at least if you the
Amendment,
recognize
yeah.
yeah the formal put writing formal equality into the Constitution as though men and women are interchangeable for all in all circumstances, which in turn prompted this whole backlash led by Phyllis Schlafly and so on. And what I need your help with is how that maps how that dovetails chronologically with the Reagan administration. Because if I remember rightly,
Yeah,
all of
when
this was
was
happening in the
that?
decade prior to Reagan, or is that or are they roughly concurrent? I mean, this is your
Honestly, because
field, not mine.
no, now wasn't that was it 60s or 70s? I don't know. Let me, yeah, because when now became an actual thing, I'm
I'm
looking
going to
right
have to
now.
Google if you're not. Are you
Yeah,
going to
I
look this up there? Please,
know.
please look this up for me because this is if we're
Yeah.
talking about the culture war and the simulation, the the NGO industrial complex is another dimension of the same sociocultural sort of matrix. And if I remember rightly, it wasn't until the late 70s or maybe even early 80s that the ERA was finally
Mm.
scotched, which would put it not a million miles off the Reagan. Uh,
No, so now it was officially formed late 60s. Reagan
that's
wasn't
right.
president until late 70s or late 80s.
Right, but over what period? I'm gonna have to look this. Apologies. I'm gonna have to Google now.
Yeah. Wait, so hold on. So no, Reagan
Equal,
was his first term was 1981,
equal
81 to
rights.
89. And then now, so the ERA, when was this? See, now I have to do my historical research.
1982 it
Yeah.
failed. When
Okay.
was Reagan elected?
81.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But the thing, I don't know, like maybe there's a
Hmm.
link, maybe there's not. Maybe I'm reaching here, but what was so interesting about the history of now is that the Equal Rights Amendment campaign seems to have crystallized the kind of proto form of the right wing, of
Hmm.
the culture war right wing,
Yeah.
in that it mobilized a lot of Christians who had sort of complementarian understanding of men and women, which was obviously at odds with formal equality. And it mobilized a lot of American conservatives who were just like, no, this isn't right. Phyllis Schlafly, who, was Phyllis Schlafly,
Yeah.
they're a really interesting character. And then a whole set of funding mechanisms, which kind of coalesced and crystallized
Hmm.
and consolidated off the back of that. If I remember rightly, it spurred the formation of a bunch of think tanks, and basically by the time it failed in
Hmm.
'82, the battle lines were drawn. So I mean, maybe it was Reagan's fault, or maybe everyone it was all sort of incipient at that point, and he
Hmm.
was kind of he rode a horse that was already tacked up and
Yeah,
ready to
that is a
go. I
good
don't know.
point. Yeah. No, I can see that. I can see
You know,
that.
and like to be clear, what I'm not saying here is that it was all the fault of those silly feminists, because obviously it is a
No,
very much more complex dialectic
of
than that. And
course.
everybody's always trying to do things for the best, and
Yeah.
the intention was good on all sides, but it's one of those irreducible differences in sort of basic worldview, which is just lends itself to this kind of stupid deadlock.
But which all goes to show that again, like the culture war speaks to this kind of hyperreal politic where it's like we create
Hmm.
these kind of, these allegedly irreconcilable kind of ideological factions, when in reality, well, they're in reality, they're divorced from reality. Like we're talking about these very abstract concepts, which sure, I mean, have some real ramifications, but the fact that they're so blown up, it's like, okay, but what's actually happening on the ground?
Hmm.
Um, anyway, I do want to ask you this. Like, there's this part where he talks about sexual difference, or the lack thereof, and like these gender bending
Oh yes.
celebrities that he's saying that it's not that everybody is like gay or even bi or whatever. It's that there's no sexual difference anymore, and the orgy is over. That's where we get the quote. I don't know. And what did you see there? I'm sure you had a lot of thoughts.
Um, It kind of feels accurate to me.
Oh,
I mean, it's not, at a sort of, real world level. Obviously, it's not. People, at least some people, are still having kids. Men and women still exist. That hasn't gone away. But like one of the, you get all this really stupid discourse online about men and women. I'm kind of bored of it all. I've got to be honest. I'm kind of over the whole men and women thing. Like it's engagement bait, and there doesn't really feel like there's much else to it. But one of the thoughts that sometimes keeps me up at night is like you get these sort of endless stupid discourses about how men are sort of neutered or effeminate or whatever. And then counter to that, you have these sort of stupid hypermasculine archetypes where people like work out their shoulders and upper arms, and then they skip leg day, and the whole effect is kind of it looks odd in real life, just like Instagram face. It's like the male version of Instagram face,
yeah.
right? You're only really looking at yourself from the waist up. And I and then and it's always being sort of negatively contrasted with this kind of effete book reading sort of male feminist type who buys Labubus and yeah, like the Labubu man. Um, who's like deliberately trying to make himself softer and less threatening and more kind of empathetic and so on and so forth. And sometimes I think, well, is it not at least plausible that this is actually more evolutionarily adaptive given our
Mm.
current circumstances than any sort of hypermasculine kind of instance of the Bronze Age mindset, if you like. This seems intuitively at least possible. We live in these very cramped and very surveilled environments. There's not a whole lot of room for bar fights and
No.
gunfights at the OK Corral or any of that stuff. Most people don't do physical jobs. Yeah, there isn't a whole load of scope for machismo. And if you work a desk job, actually you really do need to keep it three-quarters buttoned. You need to develop soft skills. You need all of this stuff. And this it could be, I don't know, it could be that some women find this, whether or not they admit it, kind of secretly not very appealing and would actually prefer a bit more spice and machismo and aggression in their lives, but also not. I feel like there's a
Mm.
real this is just a hunch, and I'm kind of too old really to comment on this because I've been married for like over a decade. But I have this sneaking suspicion sometimes that how do I put this without just being really offensive? I'm not sure I can. I just have this sneaking suspicion that people kind of miss toxic masculinity
Yeah.
a little bit.
Of course
Um,
they do. Yeah.
and
I mean, not the
and
toxic part, but like the raw, at least the raw
correct. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
masculinity.
The raw
Yeah.
masculine energy is like people bemoan its lack, even though they also find it intolerable when it appears. And that's a real sort
Yeah.
of point of conflict.
I know girls who are like, oh, he's so problematic, he's so toxic. But when they see a man do a thing that's like very rawly masculine that could go, for example, I have a friend whose husband can be, a little gruff and she gets very upset and her feelings are hurt, but then somebody stole some of their Amazon packages and he saw them and he chased the guy down. And she was like, oh my God, that was so dangerous. But then she was like, but I really liked it. And I was like, see,
Mm.
you do like a tough man. You don't like when he's disrespectful, of course, but like you want that raw kind of thing because there's something inherently appealing. And it's makes you feel a little bit safe too when it's channeled in the right way. But
Yeah, I mean, I think if I mean, I'm sure you've come across the riff about how the pill was the first transhumanist technology. I
sure.
sort of feel like Baudrillard, but might or might not have agreed with that, but
I
I'm not
think
sure
he
he
would.
would have shot that down. I mean, it
Yeah.
seemed, that's if the pill was the first transhumanist technology, and we've been kind of fiddling with our organism or fiddling with our the sort of
Mm.
basic template ever since. Like my sense is one, it doesn't really work because all you really do is sort of send things. You end up reverting to norm eventually, even if it takes two or three generations. I don't think it's possible to rewrite the human template, no matter how
Sure.
ambitiously people try. I just don't think that's. I don't think we understand what the template is, such as to be able to rewrite it. And that sort of the efforts are mostly hubris. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to go through some fairly kind of you're not going to end up creating some monsters in the process of trying,
Mm.
or just leaving a lot of injured or damaged or lost or confused people.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and again, I think it's my gut feel is that Baudrillard needs to be read, not just as a text for now, but also slightly as an historical text at this
Mm.
point too.
Yeah.
In that, he's writing about this stuff before before the consequences of playing with ourselves in that way,
Yeah.
which I don't mean as an innuendo, to be clear. They before the consequences of that were quite so in your face,
Yeah.
as they pretty much inevitably
Yeah.
are now. It all felt sort of exciting and mysterious and possible. And I mean, Judith Butler's roughly contemporary
Mm.
as well, isn't she? And um, she's sort of proposing this, half joking and half not, that maybe if we think hard enough and desire hard enough, we can desire ourselves into being something completely different. And then a lot of people tried. A lot of people kind of took it seriously and tried. And I don't know that it does work. I think
Yeah.
I understand why people try. I really do,
Sure.
but I'm not sure that it does work.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and so I'd sort of I'm inclined to read his commentary about that sort of with half an eye to what's happened since and
Mm.
just how many casualties there have been since,
Yeah.
and to read it and to read it at least with a note of caution as an historical artifact of where they were at that time when the simulation felt groundless. It felt like there wasn't like everyone you
Mm.
were hurtling towards the ground and you weren't going to hit it because there was no ground.
Yeah.
And I think if there's a difference between then and now, it's that people are very uncomfortably aware of the ground, and a lot of people have actually just hit it.
Yeah, and I mean, just to kind of wrap everything up and tie it together, like you said on Substack that you were reading this, I guess, alongside the Book of
Mm.
Revelation. So, I mean,
Yes.
just and it's interesting because the end of the book, like it ends with this chapter, desert forever, this kind of
That's right.
apocalyptic image that everything is just this
Mhm.
flat, empty desert. So I don't know, I'm interested, like,
Mm.
did you recognize anything in Revelation or did anything resonate while, reading
Well, I
both
mean,
of
you
them?
say you say desert forever, but I mean, my encounter with the American desert was Burning Man. You remember, which was anything
Mm.
but empty.
Uh-huh.
That was, and that had more than its fair share of apocalyptic imagery.
Yeah.
The bonfire. I mean, the whole thing is pure hallucinatory.
Yeah.
The entirety of Burning Man is conducted in the register of the Book of Revelation, much more than it is the ordinary register of anything. Um, I mean, if you want pure simulation, I'm not sure it gets much purer than
Mhm.
Burning Man, short of actually just exiting the physical world altogether. Um, yeah, no, I mean that whole experience was in the sort of visionary, poetic register of the Book of Revelation, and that was my desert experience. So
Mm,
again, I'm sort of in that I'm going respectfully to disagree with Baudrillard about what deserts mean
okay.
necessarily.
Mm,
Uh, or to say perhaps we can complicate his read on what deserts mean. There's a lot more there than emptiness. I
mm,
mean the
okay.
actually, if we're going to go back to the New Testament, Jesus went out into the desert and, he saw a bunch of stuff
Mm,
and not all of it was great. But, that's an important part of the story as well.
yeah, I didn't think of that.
Uh,
Yeah, that's an interesting insight to close with. So with that,
mm.
Mary, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
on.
This has been great.